When you grow up, you don't think of your dad as being something special. He's just your father. It's only when one starts thinking back now of what all he achieved and how he thought about different things. So
I want to win the high jump. I'm the shortest in the class, but I'm going to win the high jump at school. Next thing, I'm being driven out to Stellenbosch to Olympic coach because, if you want to be the best, then go for the best. And we learned there's no in between. You go for the best.
He was a fantastic designer. I know he's probably known quite well for restoration work, but actually the thing that drew me to his practice and to him was the idea of this design of new buildings.
We have to acknowledge that Harvey was probably the most influential architect in South Africa.
Well, I'm Gwen Fagan, Harvey's wife, and we've been married for 72 years. But before that, we went out for another 3 years, so we've known each other for 75 years.
I'm Henry Fagan, my dad's oldest child and his only son.
My name is Helena Fagan, so I'm the first daughter of Harvey, my daddy.
So I'm Gawie Fagan's third child, middle daughter. My name's Jessie Theron Walton, my second name being my dad's name and my grandmother's name, which I'm quite proud of.
My name's John Wilson Harris. I've worked with Gawie Fagan for the past 26 years.
My naam is Rozelle Morta en ek het vir die Fagans 35 jaar gewerk.
My name is Henk Lourens. I am the current president of the Cape Institute for Architecture.
I think the most important is honesty. And that I think is so good, because if that you make you that your important thing in life, then you don't try to get jobs for the money you're going to make out of them.
I think his passion for everything he does, that's probably the most important thing about it. And his honesty and seriousness about doing things right and getting it done properly.
I'd say adventure. And loyalty to friends.
He loves nature and animals, and he's very passionate about looking after the environment, looking after South Africa and heritage. And that was, I think, one of his main interests, and that's probably the one interest we really shared, is our love of nature.
He was always a very friendly person, sort of every morning coming in and greeting everybody and with a smile.
He was amusing. He could take a lot of jokes and make jokes of everything.
And he was also passionate about doing things for people and making sure that everyone was treated fairly. He would feel sorry for a beggar walking next to the side of the road that most people would just ignore.
How he would tackle things fearlessly. He investigated everything so thoroughly so that he could come up with his own solution and not steal solutions from magazines or books. He was always thinking creatively. Always had little bits of paper that he was scribbling ideas on.
He used to do quite a lot of photography. He's a very good photographer. And it was something he encouraged in us from a very young age. So we had a dark room, and especially in my photography it started with insects and animals, and later became bird photography. And he was very, very encouraging with that. It was something we really shared.
Meneer Fagan was regtig maar 'n sagte mens, baie goed gemaneerd, ja, en hy was altyd dieselfde. Wat ek die meeste van hom onthou, van ek het sy boeke gedoen, hy was 'n eerlike, opregte mens.
People will say that he didn't have much of one, but I thought he had a hugely great sense of humor, and I think that it may have gone over a lot of people's heads.
Also, all the work we did together, because my dad was amazing in that he had an incredible understanding of engineering, more than any probably other architect I've ever met. So he would, when he designed the building, it already encompassed the engineering, the structural engineering requirements. And so we could actually talk about how the structural engineering aspects of a building work. And then I would obviously do the calculations and refine it, or come with alternative suggestions. So that was always very exciting, working together with my dad, especially on new, interesting buildings.
He was a very fair person. very concerned about doing the right thing in his life, very concerned about buildings that were being demolished, which had historical value.
But as children already, we were inspired in every way and supported in every way. We used to go to sleep with him playing the piano and my mom singing.
It's been a really pleasant office to work in because it has a sort of family atmosphere. I mean, both the Fagans are wonderful people. It's always had that that small sort of practice feel about it, although we've done the most interesting stuff. We seem to attract these various different kind of projects, from new work to restoration work, and everything in between. But nothing ever boring. I don't think we've done too many garage extensions.
Everything was wonderful with him. Whatever I did, I enjoyed, and he enjoyed. I just enjoyed my whole life with him.
I've got various memories that are probably more fun. We did a lot of weekend site meetings with my father, and we helped quite a lot. So one of my memories was, it's maybe not a favorite, but it's a fun one. It was standing in the rain at Worcester with a staff and a torch while my dad was on the theodolite trying to measure up a site and shouting across the field at each other to get the measurements right.
So togetherness is another thing I remember about my father. He always had to do everything together as a family, as a unit. He was a very loving person and a very supportive person in everything he wanted to do. So Sundays, no, we all had to be home because it's family day and, he wants us around the house. And then we'd all be here and give up all our little boyfriend trips and things. And then he'd be down in the cellar grinding away or something, and we wouldn't see him until lunchtime. But that was his feeling of being together.
Meneer Fagan het nie net werk gedoen nie, hy het ook ander goed gedoen. Hy was besig met 'n boot langsaan by die parkeerarea en hy was besig met 'n vliegtuig onder by die kantoor. So dit was nie net werk nie, dit was heel interessanter, meer as net werk.
When I used to leave the office every evening, he would sort of say to me, and send my regards to Nikki, who's my wife. So I'd say, yes, we'll do. And he always used to sort of say, are you sure you're going to send my regards? Does she ever get my regards? So yes. And it was every evening, it was that kind of thing. And then actually the last words that he said to me was that as well, send my regards to Nikki.
Harvey was at his happiest, I think, when he was on a sailing boat, especially when he went with his children. And Henny, his eldest son, always went with him and did a lot of the bad kind of things that had to be done on a boat. Henny looked after that. But he sailed a lot. He sailed from Cape Town to Rio on 5 trips. And he won the second trip to Punta del Este. In a huge fleet, he was first. And the last trip he did in 2008, he sailed to Salvador. And in a huge fleet, he was the oldest man with the smallest boat, and he came first. Sailing,
of course, was totally a passion that I inherited from my dad, because there you spend so many days together, day and night actually, and working because we were racing, not just cruising. So it's sort of discussions all the time and actually working together with him to try to work out how we can get to the finish line as quickly as possible.
As ek aan meneer Fagan dink, dan is dit gewoonlik soggens wanneer hy inkom. Dan kom hy by die trappe af en loop tot voor en hy sê, môre Rozelle, gaan dit vanoggend hier? En na dit dan loop hy op by die trappe na die ander verdieping van die kantoor.
We were all involved in all of the other things that were happening around the office. For instance, when Gawie and his crew were preparing for the Cape to Punta del Este race in 1982, I think, we were shuttling between the office and the yacht basin, picking up supplies, taking it to him, taking calls about what would be needed down at the boat. So it was always very interesting. There were just much more than architecture going on. So it was an experience of life, basically, more so than just architecture.
he described it himself in a lecture that he gave all over the world. And he had 10 points that he mentioned, which were important to him and to his style of working. I can't mention all 10, but I'm telling you, the first lot was simplicity, integrity, economy of means, and historical and heritage important of what he was working with. You don't design to look like something special. You design what is the most economical and yet beautiful.
His inquisitiveness and attention to detail. He'd sit and he'd say, look at that little flower, how it's moving in the breeze, you see, and it's touching the one next to it. And he noticed little details, and those are things that, of course, even now, I look at the little flowers in my garden and say, that was Daddy's little flower, and it's dancing again. It's coming, and look how it's sparkling in the sun. You know, he'd catch everything, and also obviously in his design, his attention to detail. So I'd say with Harvey, his work was his life, but also his life molded his work.
He came from a modernist background, so he'd been fed Le Corbusier, and he really did take that as a student into the work that he eventually produced. You could see that there's this connection between the modernists and obviously his work, which crossed over rather well actually with Cape Dutch buildings. So the modernists and Cape Dutch buildings have a very similar sort of thing that goes on there. The other thing that I saw, which I've always wondered about, was the idea that there's nothing that happens outside the building. There's never a sort of covered veranda or something like that. It's always the building is the spaceship that lands, and that's the building. And if you want to have a veranda, then you open up your big glass windows, and your building is the veranda, and that's the way it works.
We have to acknowledge that Harvey was probably the most influential architect in South Africa. And I think it is because of his groundedness and the fact that he could distill our vernacular architecture into a very modernist architecture. But it became relevant and it became contextualized through his hand and through his understanding of the vernacular architecture and the local architecture, not necessarily just vernacular. So he had an incredible influence on many of us as students, as we grew up as architects, and many of us are still trying to grow up as architects. And I think this building that we're sitting in today in the S is probably the epitome of that distillation or of the architecture.
Well, I think firstly the house, of course, was our introduction of working together with the family. So that was very important, obviously. The S means the hearth. And therefore the hearth to us was very important as a central point where all the family could gather every evening, because we felt that to get together in a nice warm atmosphere was very important for our family life and for loving each other.
There were many things I was involved with. A lot of it was just sort of menial work, carrying things, bricks, and checking the concrete. When we poured this big slab over here, the trucks stopped at the road over there, and we had wheelbarrows we made a special ramp to bring the concrete from the road directly to the level of the slab, because there was no other structure at the time. So I was also running with a wheelbarrow and making sure the concrete was being mixed properly and brought across. I helped with a lot of the timber work, and I often helped him when we were welding things together. We did a lot of the work ourselves, as you might know, building these door frames over there. So yes, I would often just help him, and he would let me hold here or maybe carry on drilling here so long.
We were together every night around a fire, doing homework, doing our things, and encouraging each other and helping each other with everything.
I think building our family home was probably one of the most binding and one of the most amazing things I think any family can do. We each had our role. I was the youngest, so second youngest. So I did mostly the cement mixing, adding the sand, adding the cement, and running the mixer. And my older brother was the one who had to push the heavy wheelbarrows. I did bricklaying, I did plastering. But I think just the sense of building a home, because we were in a tiny flat, which was very difficult for 6 people to be in a tiny flat. And having the space here and building something where we knew these were our roots, I think was a very, very wonderful thing to do.
He influenced who I was in every way. Being fearless, being adventurous, fighting for the things you believe in. And for me, of course, his love for music rubbed off on me, really.
I've learnt as well that people that you're working with are actually part of your family. You see them more than your family most of the time. So that you respect them and be part of their lives, they be part of your lives.
My passion for understanding structures and making them as economical as possible. Yes, I think designing something to be as minimalist and as clean as possible, that's something in my profession that I've inherited from my dad, certainly.
I think life lessons from our dad was honesty, was a big one. If you caught us in a lie, it really was a serious offense. And then that you put others and nature before yourself. A good example was one evening when he came home and I had a horse, an injured horse, which I kept down in the cellar here. And he came home and went down and he gave me a huge talking to. He said, "Your horse hasn't got enough bedding." And I said, "But I haven't got any more." And he said, "It doesn't matter. You go out and you do whatever it takes, but you are going to make your horse comfortable now before you go to bed." So in the end, I tore up strips of newspaper to put down for bedding for the horse. But that was how he felt about things. It wasn't good enough to be almost there or to have the horse relatively comfortable. It had to be comfortable.
Meneer Fagan het 'n groot impak op my lewe gehad. Ek het verskriklik baie geleer deur hulle.
I think Harvey's impact on my way of thinking about architecture is sort of twofold. I think firstly there was this idea that he had of buildings being extremely complex in their, some of those buildings are very, very complicated roofs and that type of thing. And then simplicity as well was also a huge idea of his, that he tried to simplify things. And so that dichotomy of the two and where they are appropriate and where they aren't was an interesting thing for me.
Creative thinking is something we all learned from him. Love for life, or looking for knowledge. He slept in the same bed since the day they were married. He made a bed for them, and he never had the need for a new one or a glossier one or a fancier one. You learn that there's quality in simplicity.
In the 72 years that we were married, we seldom fought. We did now and again, but quickly made up again. And they were very sorry for the disturbance in our lives. But we had a very happy life and were so busy, both of us, and helping each other in the work that we were busy with, that we never had time to fight, I think. Because in all my research, he used to help me with photography. And in all his work, I helped him with his research and the landscape that had to come with his buildings.
I worked on this book that Mama wrote for him, Gwendolyn's Harvey, and I did all the sourcing of the photos and the layout and everything. And I couldn't stop being amazed at how much he packed into one life. That book isn't even a half of what we wanted to put in. It's incredible what he managed to fit into a life.
Ek sal mis die inkoms soggens en ek sal mis die een wees, die leer van hom.
I think just his warmth as well. He was so warm towards everyone in his family, and I think probably just that.
I think just his quiet presence. You know, he was just there.
Lying next to him in bed and in his arms.